The Pooka Pages magazine, Yule 2020 by Lora Craig-Gaddis. Pooka and the Yule Thief, Part 2. Elsie and Pooka returned to the cottage. Along the way, the witch gathered pine cones, moss, twigs, and berries, using the skirt of her apron to carry them. She dumped her haul on the herb room table, then proceeded to grab various jars off the shelves that lined the room. "Pooks, do we have any popcorn left over from last night?" she asked. "Uh-huh," he nodded. "You made way too much, as usual." "I like popcorn," the girl said as she left the room. "A lot," her grinning cat called after her. She'd no sooner assembled her supplies than the troop of elves, fairies, and one grumpy gnome appeared at the herb room window. Thistle was in the lead, and Edgar brought up the rear, making sure there were no stragglers. Elsie opened the window, and they flooded in, arranging themselves around the sides of the room. Edgar perched on one of the shelves. Thistle and Pooka parked on the long wooden table that Elsie was standing next to. She held up a thin, dried slice of orange. The light from the window glowed through it. "Ooh, pretty," cried the fairies. The elves grinned. "Yeah, that's cool. Sort of looks like the stained glass that humans decorate their buildings with." "The juice of this fruit is sometimes called liquid sunshine," smiled Elsie. "What could be better to symbolize the returning sun?" She pulled a jar from one of the shelves. "See? I have a bunch of them for your tree." "But how do we hang them?" asked the gnome. Elsie held up a sewing needle and some gold thread. "With this." The elves and fairies all nodded eagerly and asked, "What else?" Elsie produced an open jar of cinnamon sticks. "These are from the bark of a tree," she said. "Smell them." A few elves approached and sniffed. "They smell like cookies." More elves crowded around the jar and took turns smelling. Elves love cookies. Elsie showed them how to tie the cinnamon sticks into little bundles and then decorate them with holly leaves and berries. She then sprinkled the bundles with cornstarch to look like snow. The tiny troop applauded. "What about pomanders?" asked Pooka. Elsie nodded. "Yes." She took down a jar of whole cloves and grabbed an orange from the table. You tie a ribbon or piece of twine around the orange and make a loop for hanging. Then start sticking the cloves into it. You can either make a cool pattern or just cover the whole orange. "I want to try," called out one of the elves. He pushed through the others and climbed onto the table. "Okay." Elsie set the orange in front of him and dumped a little pile of cloves onto the table. Then she held up an apple. "Slice this and dip it in lemon juice." "It keeps them from turning brown," said Pooka. He'd done this before. Elsie nodded. "When it's dry, you have a lovely red and white ornament to hang on your tree." "But what about garlands?" asked the gnome. He folded his arms across his chest and glared at her. Elsie grinned. "That's the best part." She produced a big bowl of stale white popcorn and another of bright red cranberries. Holding up the sewing needle and a spool of thread from her basket, she said, "We string these together into long strands and then loop them along the branches of the tree." Soon, a score of elves were sitting cross-legged on the table, teensy tongues poked out in concentration, threading the popcorn and the cranberries into long garlands. Fairies were busy poking oranges with cloves and then rolling them in a mixture of dry red rose petals and cinnamon. Thistle was busy bundling cinnamon sticks and finding creative ways to decorate them. Edgar watched calmly from his perch on the shelf. "Hm," said the gnome. "We still need something really impressive for our Yule tree." "Yes, you do," agreed Elsie. "Take this orange slice. Now, poke this bit of florist wire through 3 cranberries." "Okay." "We'll need to make a bunch of them because next we're going to poke them all around the edge of this orange slice, like this." And Elsie demonstrated. The gnome's eyebrows shot up. "Yes!" he exclaimed. "It makes a sun!" The little man hopped up and down with excitement. "This is fun!" he said. Soon he was furiously stringing cranberries and poking them into the orange slices. Elsie smiled across the table at Pooka, and the little cat winked back at her. It was dark by the time their crafts were finished and the forest folk had left. They took their new Yule tree decorations with them. The next morning, Elsie and Pooka rose early and headed out to watch the new sun rise from the farmer's hilltop. Colors of pink, orange, and purple filled the sky. The tall pine tree was covered with glorious, glowing natural ornaments that the birds and squirrels all flocked to. A small hedgehog was nibbling happily on the popcorn garlands. The witch and her cat then returned to the cottage, and Elsie went to start a fire in the hearth before making their breakfast. "Look!" cried Pooka. She turned, and he was staring at their Yule tree. It was all sparkly. "It's been sprinkled with fairy dust!" cried Elsie as she scooped him up in her arms. Pooka purred up at her. "I think that's the forest folks' way of saying thank you." The end. Yule 2020, a birthday party for the sun. Since Litha, which was the peak of summer, the days have gotten shorter. But on Yule, the winter solstice, the sun is reborn. It's the baby sun's birthday. And from now until the next Litha, each day the sun will grow and stay longer in the sky. Let's see what else is in this Yule issue of Pooka Pages magazine. A letter from Scotland and Fiona Tinker. I'd like to preface this by saying that I attempted to look up the Scottish pronunciations of a lot of the words in here, and hopefully I get them correct. If not, no offense is intended. Dear little witches, two pairs of eyes looked out from under their favorite bush. The eyes belonged to Attila the bun and Meg the cat with half a tail. The bush belonged to the people of the Shee, growing as it did near the edges of the fairy mound. It was winter. It was dark, and the shrub was wearing its December look, all bare and brown twigs. Both the animals shivered a little as the whistling wind blew around their nethers. Meg sighed. "Seems like winter has lasted a long time," he said sadly. Even the great feast of Samhain wasn't the same this year, what with all the humans having to stay apart so much. "It's been hard," agreed Attila, "and it'll be a while till the cuckoo heralds in the spring." They moved closer to each other for warmth. "Even the unseelie court is quiet," added Attila. "That's not natural." "That's because we're waiting on something special," growled the voice of the Cailleach, the old woman of winter. Her voice was neither here nor there, but carried on the wind. Both Meg and Attila jumped in fright. Fear made their fur stand on end. "We really shouldn't be afraid of her," said Meg boldly. "She never harms us. She just makes a lot of noise when we get in her way." "Yes," agreed Attila, "but she is so scary, and her winter look is terrifying." There was a flash of blue light in front of them, and there stood the old woman Winter in all her glory. She had grown really tall. Her blue skin shone and sparkled with pretty snowflakes. Her hair was loose and wild around her head. Her one eye glared at them from the middle of her forehead. "You're not scared of me?" she asked. "Do you like me looking like this?" "You look grand," squeaked Meg, fibbing in fear. "And I'm trying my very cat best not to be scared." Attila said nothing. He was scared and didn't mind who knew it. "Well, that's good," she said. Then she peered at them keenly. Both animals felt as if they were being examined under a microscope. "You two are bored, aren't you?" "There's always trouble when you are bored." She looked away and seemed deep in thought. "Perhaps you should have an adventure with me, whilst Angus sleeps winter away." Attila the Bun and Meg the Cat with half a tail were too curious to run away. If truth be told, they were both very curious about the Cailleach's suggestion. Normally, she just yelled at them to get out from under her feet. This was different. This was interesting. Meg liked interesting. That's how he ended up with half a tail in the first place, after all. As if on cue, his half a tail perked up and began to buzz. Always the sign of magic and trouble. Attila the Bun covered his eyes with his ears. He didn't know what was coming next, but he was sure he wasn't going to like it much. He was right. What happened next was the eldritch screech of the Cailleach's owl as he flew from somewhere to land on her shoulder. Then there was a sensation of being pulled up into the air and of being held firmly under a warm cloak. Suddenly, Attila felt fast. He knew he was flying through the air. He kept his eyes tight shut because rabbits don't like being off the ground much at all. Eventually, things came to a halt. Attila and Meg wobbled out from underneath the Old Woman of Winter's cloak. Both of them looked dazed from the speed they had traveled. Both of them shivered with frightful delight at the unexpected turn of events. But where were they? They looked around. Ahead of them stood an avenue of standing stones, reaching out as if to touch the moon that shone clearly and brightly on the path. The path led to a great circle of stones, even larger than those on the side of the road. In the center of the circle stood an enormous stone, so tall it almost reached up to the moon, as if it wanted to caress her lovely face. The Cailleach laughed. "You forgot your question." "I didn't," said Attila. "I'm just wary of asking it, but I will. Where are we?" "We're on the Isle of Lewis," answered the old woman. "These are the standing stones of the Cailleach, guardians of this sacred land for thousands of years." But both Meg and Attila were halfway up the path to investigate the circle of stones, and she never knew if they heard her or not. Laughing to herself, she followed them. Meg and Attila happily explored the huge circle and sniffed all the megaliths. Attila crouched at the bottom of the tallest one. He looked up and could not see the top. What he could see was the way the moonlight danced and giggled from one stone to another, making them sparkle. They were beautiful. He looked at the Cailleach. "Thank you," he said delightedly. "They are wonderful." "Oh, I've only just started," she said, her single eye twinkling like a star. With that, the Cailleach raised her arms and began to sing. Her song was sweet, not the song of the winds or the storms. It rang through the winter night, making the musical sounds of icicles jangling together. Her owl flew around her as she swayed to the sound of the magic in her own voice. And then, oh my, and then the skies above them were filled with colors, greens, purples, reds, and yellows. Great swaths of color followed the swaying and the singing of the Cailleach. As her song grew stronger and longer, her arms moved and danced, and the colors followed her movements. "The Northern Lights," gasped Meg. "The merry dancers." Attila just stared in wonder as the sky colored itself in, almost as if a giant child had spilt a paintbox on it. All the colors swirled and swayed, mixed and mingled, then split and separated again. And all the while the Old Woman of Winter sang into the sky. As the two animal friends watched in wonder, the Cailleach slowed her song and then stopped. But the sky carried on dancing to music of its own. "That was magical," sighed Attila. "It really was." "Oh, we're not done yet," said the old woman. With that, she scooped up the cat and the rabbit, and they were off once again. This time, when they landed, there was sand underfoot. "Where now?" asked Attila. Lushkinshire Beach on the Isle of Harris, answered the Cailleach, sounding for all the world like a tired tour guide. The lights were still dancing in the sky with even more colors than before. There was an outcrop of rocks at the place where the shore and the sea met, and the sky colors reflected on them, making them all the colors of the rainbow. Seated on the rocks was a colony of great seals, some of whom had their huge heads turned to the sky, watching the dancers too. These were the biggest selkies either Attila or Meg had ever seen, and they looked a little startled at the size of them. The Cailleach noticed their astonishment. "These are the clan MacCodrum," she said. "They are the sea bairns, both human and seal." Before any more questions could be asked, the most beautiful Gaelic choir ever heard sang in an ancient song that made the little hairs on the backs of the necks of the listeners stand up. It was a song that spoke to the soul of those who heard it. The Selkies sang, and they sang, and they sang. Then they stopped. It was as if a curtain had suddenly come down on a wonderful concert performance, leaving the audience begging for more. There was no more. One by one, the clan MacCodrum slid into the sea and out of sight. "That was amazing!" cried Meg. "It was fabulous!" screeched Attila, thrilled at what he'd just heard. The Cailleach said nothing. The beauty of the song left tears in her eye. Eventually she sighed, wiped her eye, and looked at the two friends. "You'll be wanting to know what that's about then," she stated. Meg and Attila just nodded. "It's the time of the winter solstice," she explained. "It's the time of the newborn sun and of the newborn sun." Attila and Meg nodded some more, pretending they understood. The Cailleach continued. "Humans celebrate the return of the sun, knowing winter will lose its strength from now on. But it reminds me that I lose my strength too, and must eventually give way to Angus and Bride, when they return with the strength of the light." "Is that why you cried?" asked Meg, always the nosy one. The Cailleach smiled. "No, those were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy. You see, the great seals have their babies at midwinter. The song you heard was the colony, singing a new sun into the world. The proper word for that is not a song. It's an oran. It's a word in Gaelic that means so much more than a song. It's a magical blessing and a weaving of the future. It is a song of love for the returning sun and for all the newborn sons of this time of year." "I like that. What were they singing?" asked Attila. "Something like this," answered the old woman dreamily. "This night is born the sun. This night the sun is reborn. This night is born the sun of our joy. This night is born the sun in glory. This night gleamed the sun and shore together. This night was born the son of the MacCodrum." Meg tried to catch the words of the Oran and sing as the Selkies had, but cats cannot sing, and he soon stopped when he saw the glower of the Cailleach. Once again all was silent, all was still. A wondrous sense of peace fell over them all. The silence was broken by Meg's belly rumbling. He looked a little embarrassed. "I know," said the old woman of winter. "This is the part in the adventure where the Bannocks appear." "It is," agreed Meg solemnly. "Tough," said Attila the Bun unsympathetically. "Angus isn't here, and there isn't going to be any Bannocks." "I wouldn't be too sure of that, little rabbit," said the Cailleach as she pulled oatmeal out of her cloak. "I can cook too." And, as the Cailleach set about cooking bannocks for a greedy cat, the sky still danced whilst the heads of the clan of MacCodrum bobbed above the waves in time with the moving of the tides. It was the perfect way to spend a perfect night. And there was still the newborn sun to greet in welcome come the dawn. Peace of the solstice to you all. Till next time, Fiona Tinker. In this issue, there are a couple of very special guest authors. Aletta, age 9, and her sister Amelie, who's 7. The girls wrote to Pooka. He loves getting mail from the kids, and included stories they'd both written. Pooka was tickled pink, especially since the stories were about him. He convinced Lora to include them for the kids to enjoy as well. Aletta's story struck her as the perfect read-along tale. Elsie and Pooka Go to the Farm by Aletta, age 9. Elsie and Pooka were spending the weekend at the farm. First, they went to see the pigs. Pooka rolled in the mud. Then Elsie and Pooka went to see the chickens. Pooka rolled in a pile of feathers. By this time, Pooka was thirsty. Elsie, can we go to the barn and see what herbs are on sale? Pooka asked. Okay, Elsie said. While Elsie was looking at the herbs, Pooka found a puddle of sugar water and lapped away. When he was not thirsty anymore, he rolled in the sugar water. Elsie bought roses and lemon balm. As Elsie looked at Pooka, she saw a muddy, feathery, sticky mess. Pooka, I think we'd better go home now so I can start the mashed potatoes for dinner, Elsie said, but she left out the part where she was giving Pooka a bath right away. Pooka licked his lips at the thought of mashed potatoes. When they got home, Elsie carried Pooka to the bathtub, turned on the water, put bubble mix in, and prevented him from escaping. The bathtub was a mess. Then Elsie cleaned the bathtub. Afterward, she made dinner. Pooka ate 6 bowls of food. Then he and Elsie went off to bed and dreamed lots of wonderful dreams. The end. Bonus short story, Pooka and Elsie Go Sledding by Amelie, age 7. It was winter, and Elsie and Pooka were at the top of their hill with a sled. First, Elsie got on. Then she pulled Pooka onto her lap. She pushed off, and they went zooming down the hill. They sledded for hours, up, down, up, down, up, down. When it was time for lunch, Elsie and Pooka ate salad sprinkled with thyme leaves. Then they went back to sledding, up, down, up, down, up, down. For dinner, Elsie and Pooka ate chicken, rice mixed with beans and milk, and they lived happily ever after. The end. This Yule edition also includes Learn with Pooka, Yule Traditions and Trivia in Rhyme by Mama Witch Carmen. From the kitchen, it includes Yule recipes from Pooka's friends. Recently, Pooka asked everyone to share their favorite Yule recipe in Pooka Circle on Facebook. They looked so great that he and Elsie decided to put a few of them in this issue for you to try. You have recipes for peppermint creams, Sun King soup, and buckeyes. In the herb garden and the Little Book of Shadows, it discusses ivy. There is a Yule log in the witchcrafts section. You have coloring pages for either Santa or Odin, and Happy Yule. Remember, the real Pooka loves to get email. With parents' permission, you can reach him at pookachild@hotmail.com. I hope you enjoyed my reading of this Yule issue. Please go to Pooka Pages for Pagan Kids to find all of the other goodies. Download, print, and share for free. Join Pooka Circle on Facebook to interact with other pagan families and be the first to get Pooka news.